there are lots of ways to identify wines. Domestically, we often identify wines by the name of the grape varietal. We'll refer to a wine as Chardonnay or Merlot or Pinot Noir. But in France, they identify wines by where they come from. So we're going to start in one of the most famous wine regions in Burgundy and talk about the wines that come from there. Burgundy is famous and special and often expensive. These wines are very expressive of their terroir. Terroir is it's a special word in wine world. It doesn't have an exact English translation. It's kind of an idea that wines come from a sense of place. It's this romantic notion that the soil and the elevation and the climate and the weather and that wine grown on this hillside that sees this amount of sunshine is drastically different than wine grown on the other side of the hill. That something can grow and be made from one place and have such a special identity that it couldn't be from anywhere else. And this is that notion that when wines express their terroir, that we can be kind of transported, which is a nice idea, even kind of a vacation notion, which I think could be helpful these days. I hope everybody has poured themselves a glass of wine. I'd like to toast everyone for making it through the week and joining us here. Cheers. Okay, so dialing into the terroir in Burgundy. Burgundy runs in a very narrow area in France, and it runs along a limestone depository where that's the major influence of where they decided to grow these grapes. There was ancient history of growing wine here, and they spent a long time selecting what grapes they would grow and specifically where they would grow them, and decided on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. When you see a red Burgundy, you're thinking Pinot Noir, and when you see a white Burgundy, you're talking about Chardonnay. These are farmers that grow the wines. It's a smaller production, maybe 4% of the wine that France puts out is from Burgundy. This also contributes to sometimes the expense. When you hear Chablis or Montrachet or Meursault, these are white Burgundies. When you hear Musigny or Vos Romani or Beaune, these are red Burgundies. When you go to the very south of Burgundy, there is another little pocket of winemaking area called Beaujolais, where the red grape that grows there is actually Gamay. Probably most noted from its Beaujolais Nouveau release. It's a fun, fresh, fruity, celebrative wine release every November, but there are more serious and structured and dynamic wines that are grown there too. So that's kind of the deal with Burgundy. The other famous bee and wine regions in France would be Bordeaux. That's located a little bit further south, closer to the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean influence kind of moderates the temperature there, so it doesn't get too hot or too cold. The grapes don't get too ripe, and it leaves the wines with a really elegant balance. The grapes there, when you think Bordeaux, are predominantly red. You think Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. They're often blends, and blends are really important. Red blends are having kind of a moment and are very popular, and we're hearing about them from all parts of the world, which is great because, you know, sometimes the sum of all these pieces creates the greater thing. Wine blends of grapes are kind of like the perfect teamwork where everybody contributes their best components. A wine that starts heavy, falls out in the middle, and finishes strong benefits by Merlot coming up the middle and filling it out so that you have like a complete magical piece. There are sometimes more expensive pieces coming out of Bordeaux. When you think of Bordeaux, you think of the castles and the big chateaus. Maybe a good way to look at it, if you think of a target.
Where's this working?
The center of the center of a chateau would kind of be this very specific area, and their terroir lends itself to those most expensive wines. But that same producer makes wine that's a little bit maybe less expensive moving further out. And as the area broadens, these grapes are still being taken care of by the same people, but they're also maybe don't command the same price point. So there's value to be found in Bordeaux. There's also white wine made in Bordeaux. Their grapes are Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. They also make a very classic dessert wine in Bordeaux called Sauterne. Sometimes that's referred to as liquid gold, which is a very special way to complete a meal. I think those are, Bordeaux is kind of one of the most expansive regions in France. So they definitely have a much higher production and put out a lot more wine than other areas. Another space, if we move further east and south, is the Rhone. It's further south, like towards the Mediterranean. This is a warmer climate, so the grapes become more ripe. They're bigger, they're juicier, wines are more bold and powerful. In the north of the Rhone, they typically make Syrah, and in the south, they focus on Grenache. Those are the two grapes. There are also lots of blends in the Rhone as well. Châteauneuf-du-Pape is maybe one of the most famous Rhone wines. There are allowed to be more than 10 different grapes blended into that wine. So talk about a project of everybody coming together. There is also white wine made in the Rhone, just less produced and lesser known. They grow Roussanne and Viognier there. Viognier is kind of made in other parts of the world and gets a little bit more attention. Another area, if we go further, well, we're skipping right across the country into the Loire Valley, which is one of my favorite places for wine to come from. This is a horizontally inclined region that runs along the Loire River. It's very long. There's a lot of humidity close to the river, which lends itself for dessert wines well. There's a lot of grapes that are grown in the Loire. There's Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc, Cabernet Franc, Pinot Noir, Gamay, Cabernet Sauvignon. Some of the most famous pieces are maybe Sancerre, Vouvray, and Pouilly-Fumé. Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé are famous white wines made of Sauvignon Blanc. Pouilly-Fumé, not to be confused with Pouilly-Fuissé, which is a white Burgundy and made of Chardonnay. They sound alike and I get them confused sometimes. Vouvray is made of Chenin Blanc. Bourgail and Chinon are maybe the more well-known red producing AOCs in the Loire. They're both made with Cabernet Franc. Another place you would see Cabernet Franc is back in Bordeaux. That's blended into the Cabernets and the Merlots sometimes too. One of my favorite things about the Loire wines is their energy. They tend to drink very vibrant. So in France, as in most countries, the government dictates what you can grow, where you can grow it, and what for the purpose of putting things on your label. So if you wanted to make wine and put Sancerre on your label, you would have to grow the wine in the designated space called Sancerre. And then there's rules on if you can put Sancerre on your label, if it's grown there, how the wine is made, and then how it tastes at the end. And these rules can be good and bad, mostly good. They kind of protect the quality and they create a consistency so that you can rely on identifying the Sancerre as that Sauvignon Blanc that you know always has this steely mineral quality that you know that you like, and you know regardless of who makes it, you know that you can rely on enjoying Sancerre if that's something that you prefer. Some winemakers don't want their creativity to be so limited, so if they make wine in Sancerre and perhaps their finished product doesn't taste like the classic Sancerres, they might opt out and not put Sancerre on their label, but just say Vin de France, which just means it's a wine from France. It doesn't mean it's any less good, and it could be very exciting, but you wouldn't necessarily have an idea of what you were getting yourself into just based off the label. There are a lot of winemakers, I think, branching out from the classic constraints in the Loire Valley, which is very exciting, and there's lots to explore there. If you go much further north, in Alsace, there's a wine. Alsace is the wine region just across the German border. So it's cooler there, but sunnier than on the German side. Riesling is the big grape that's grown. Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Gewürztraminer are also grown there. Because it's sunnier than Germany, they tend to make the grapes ripen faster. They tend to make drier wines. So if you have a Riesling from Germany and a Riesling from Alsace, it's a somewhat safe bet that the Alsatian Riesling would be drier of the two. That's their classic style. These are fabulous food wines. Any Alsatian white wine is wonderful with fish course or a potato dish or stinky cheese, if that's your thing. It's a nice complement to a meal or any place where you'd want to introduce a wine that can hang out with some heartier food pieces that isn't necessarily red. And then if we go as far north as you can get in France, I'm so focused on the Loire. If you can go as far north as you can go and grow wine grapes, you enter Champagne, which is where those glorious, glorious bubbles come from. Champagne is such a powerful place and brand that for a period of time, everybody that was making fizzy wine wanted to call their wine Champagne, but they decided to designate some rules. So Champagne has to be a sparkling wine that comes from that very specific place. That very specific place that has that magical soil, that magical terroir that could only, be from here. Champagne is comprised of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier, so both white and red grapes. When you have a grape, like a white grape has a white skin and a white center, but Pinot Noir, for example, is a red grape with red skin on the outside, but a white center. So if you were to remove the skins, that's how you have these white appearing sparkling wines that are made with red grapes. Pinot Meunier is also a red grape. If you see Blanc de Blanc on a Champagne label, that means white of white. So that's a white wine made of entirely white grapes, probably all Chardonnay, but there are a small handful of other white grapes that are allowed in the mix. You also see rosé champagnes where they let a little bit of the skin, the Pinot Noir skin contact, come into the winemaking process, which gives it the pretty pink, cheerful color, which I think is very popular right now, which is super cool. I feel like you see a lot of pink bubbles out there, not just in Champagne. The other places where we grow that are like worth noting where they grow wine in France, in the south you have Provence, which is in the south of France on that border towards the Mediterranean, right on that Mediterranean border. In Provence, you'll see a lot of rosé. That's the classic French rosé. It's dry, it's crisp, it's clean, it's bright, citrus and herbal, usually made from Rhone varietals. This Provence is located just south of Rhone, so it's a lot of Syrah and Grenache, also Carignan. Then we have the Languedoc and Roussillon region, which hugs the southern coast kind of on your way down to Spain. And there you'll also see a lot of Rhone blends, a lot of red blends for sure. And then there's the wine region, which is probably the least creatively named, which is called Southwest France, which is located in Southwest France. It's a shame everybody else got a fun name. They did not. There are parts of Southwest France that go all the way up and hug just around parts of Bordeaux. So they grow a lot of Bordeaux grapes, but there are also these little pockets that are kind of scattered around in the southwest of France, wine growing areas where they grow Malbec and they call it Cahors, or they grow Tannat and they call it Mataran. There's all kinds of fun, obscure varietals grown there, things that we don't see very often, and lots of good value. I feel like if you're looking for economical sippers these days, Southwest France wines or wines from the Languedoc and Roussillon are a good place to go. those are our classic French wine regions. I don't know if you guys have any questions. Thank you for coming. We do have a short poll we would love you to take, but that'll appear in a little bit. First, we're going to see if you guys have any questions.
Yeah, I see Julia asked a question, Lauren.
What are good Burgundies in the $20 to $30 range? So something that's actually a great price point to be able to buy Burgundy in. If you look for the word Bourgogne on a label, it's kind of working in with that, like less specifics. So I wonder if can I write it here? So if you see that on a label, I don't know if you guys can see what I typed in. Can everybody see the chat? Okay, cool. So if you see that on a label, I feel like you can find more value there. It's wines that come from Burgundy, but just with less specific areas. So the vineyards aren't as specified. So it's kind of like that widening the target idea. Why do some reds cause headaches and stomach aches? Are there ones that people are less sensitive? Well, I think often it's alcohol that causes the headaches. But some people have a sensitivity to the additives. So ideally, wines are grape juice that ferments. There's natural ambient yeast in the air that ferments the juice and turns it into wine. It's that classic, fermentation equation where the sugar or the yeast from the air eats the sugar in the grapes and turns it into alcohol and then releases the CO2. That's super technical, maybe not so fun. But that's where you get the purest expression. That's where the juice is going to taste like it came from that very specific place. That's the best expression of terroir. Sometimes there's a lot of other junk that gets pumped into wines to work as a preservative or to manipulate the flavor a little bit. And I think that's kind of some of the stuff that hurts people in their heads and sometimes their tummies. Some people say that's a sensitivity to sulfur. I think there's other things that you can be sensitive to in wines other than sulfur, but you'll definitely see winemakers, and there's a lean to make these wines in this more natural way. Natural wine sometimes has a weird stigma around it right now, but winemakers that are looking to not over manipulate the wine are going to give you the purest expression of it, and then obviously that'll be the best for you. As with anything, as with food or with cooking, I mean, we care very much about where our wines come from, or sorry, our produce comes from when it comes from a farm versus, a large conglomerate. So these ideas, I think, could translate into anything we put into our body. Are there any up-and-coming champagnes that you recommend versus just the usual? There are so many fabulous champagnes that are not Veuve Clicquot. And Veuve Clicquot is delicious and consistent, which I think is one of the biggest hallmarks of that brand. There are lots of little growers making champagne. Lots and lots of people make champagne. Some of my favorites. I don't know about up and coming, but Gaston Chiquet is one of my favorite champagnes, and I've been able to find it not just in Pennsylvania state stores, but maybe more readily available in Jersey stores too. I don't know how far away everybody is. I'm trying to type in the I'm sensitive to just reds. I can totally drink. If you're sensitive to just red wine and not white, I would assume that had something to do with the tannins. Tannins also work. Tannins are what gives the wine, red wine, that very drying sensation in your mouth. That comes from the grape skins, and extended contact with skin or the seeds of the wine is what would give you that sensation. But maybe, perhaps that would be the defining difference between what you're drinking and having an issue with. I would think that would maybe be where that issue comes from. Why do you age red wines and not white? Well, you don't necessarily, well, tannin, again, is the answer. So tannin is a natural preservative, and it helps wines hang out in the bottle longer. But there are plenty of white wines that you can age, but because they tend to see less skin contact, therefore have less tannin, They don't have something that's naturally helping them hang out in the bottle as long. White wines that age well have probably seen some extended skin contact, and maybe if poured fresh, have a little bit more of a coppery color. Did you spend time in France? I have spent time in France. It's been a couple years at this point. I was most recently in the Loire Valley. I went with some other wine gals from Philly, and we toured wineries and regions and met winemakers and went to these large wine fairs, and it was fabulous, and we were exposed to all of these new things, and it was a good, people come from all over the world for this event we went to, and it's exciting to have that kind of celebration of all of those pieces and winemakers getting together and trading secrets, and for us to just kind of even hear their conversations. But mostly I love wine, and I like talking to people about wine, and the exchange makes everybody feel good. So, I mean, I've traveled, but mostly I just like drinking it and talking to people about it. Why is champagne more expensive than other wine? Well, the production can be less. It's a very expensive process. So wine that's made the way champagne is made, it's a long process, and it's expensive to make wine that way. If you make wine that way versus the way you would make Prosecco, which is also delicious and fresh and bright and fruity, it's a little bit less expensive. So part of it's that, part of it's how hard it is to grow grapes in that region, and part of it's the fact that champagne as a brand commands the price tag. What are the best wine websites to learn more? That's a good question. I don't know if I have a go-to wine website. I would love to get you some information and follow up, though. If anybody wants to email me, you can email me at triawine@gmail.com. That's TRIA wine@gmail.com. If you want to impress wine people, but not spend a lot, what's a good way to go? Two current favorites, say under 50. I impress wine people. I think you can find cool stuff from my beloved Loire and impress wine people. I think you can find beautiful red wines. If you find a Chinon, sometimes one that's got a little bit of age on it, costs less than $50. Yeah, for sure, like maybe like 25, 30 bucks. And if it's got a couple years on it, they tend to not just pack some punch and power, but have lots of layers. So you can drink it and enjoy it with, you know, a burger, and that's delicious. Or if you want to spend time kind of digging in deeper, there's lots of layers and pieces going on. I also love Chenin Blanc from the Loire. I think that Chenin Blancs from the Loire have beautiful depth and acidity. So like some of my sister, for example, really prefers wine that's crisp and bright. And she would say she's like a strict Sauvignon Blanc drinker. And I have poured her Loire Valley Chenin Blanc and pleased both she and my aunt, who really prefers like a Chardonnay with some oomph. So I think that those are good wines to kind of straddle a crowd. How does it work when someone takes grapes from one part of the world and then grows them in, for example, California? Well, sometimes that's illegal, but you can do that. I guess when that's approved, you take a grafting of a vine, and then how does it work? You essentially take a cutting of a vine. It's the same as, it's not the same as, but the idea of like moving, you know, picking seeds or something from one place and growing them somewhere else. You basically would take a cutting from a vine, plant it somewhere else, and get it to work with the vines that you have there. And then it will be similar to, like, it'll be the same grape, but that defining piece we talked about earlier, terroir, is has such a powerful influence on the wine. It will not be the same wine, but it's a cool way to have the same vines grow somewhere else with an entirely different terroir, and to be able to see a real well-painted picture of what that looks like, what that comparison would be. I'm a Gobby fan. If I'm a Gobby fan, Gobby's got, I would say maybe Chenin, like a fuller bodied Chenin from the Loire. Maybe a Vouvray is good for a Gobby fan, or maybe a Rhone White. I think a Roussanne could also be your jam for sure. A good gift wine. I like to gift bubbles. I feel like a bottle of champagne is one of the most beautiful and classic gifts. Even if like you don't know what somebody drinks or what their preference is, and I know some people that are, I'm a straight red wine drinker, or I'm a straight white wine drinker. Everybody likes bubbles, and even if they themselves don't adore bubbles, they're happy to open them when they have guests. Yes, Gruet from New Mexico, so cool. Those are the grandchildren of champagne winemakers. If you see Gruet, G-R-U-E-T, these wines are made just outside Albuquerque in New Mexico. They are using champagne grapes, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and making the wine the same way you would make it in Champagne at a fraction of the price, and they're beautiful and magical wines.
What's a great champagne for a wedding? A rosé champagne on a budget for a wedding?
Rosé champagne on a budget for rosé champagnes tend to be more expensive. I would say if you wanted
$25, $20 to $25.
Yeah, I'd say if you wanted pink bubbles to go outside of champagne, I would say there's beautiful sparkling wine made the same way you make champagne all over France. Sometimes it's just called Cremant. So you could have, I would go for a Cremant de Loire, or I've even had a Cremant de Bordeaux that was made with Bordeaux red grapes. Rosé, beautiful, and those range anywhere from $13 to $25. So if you want bargain sparkling that's beautiful and delicious, I think you step out of champagne.
Okay. Can I ask another question?
Did you say there's another one? Gruet does have rosé. Yes, the Croix de Roche. That's the sparkling, that's the Cremant de Bordeaux. That importer is a good friend of mine. Best way to pair with meals. I think when I'm looking to pair with food, my husband does a lot of, he was a French chef for a long time, so there's a lot of like heavy in the food stuff. So I'm always looking for stuff with a lot of acid to cut through it. I think the most important thing for pairings is to drink what you like. Of course, there's magical combinations. Things that come from the same place often go together. If you're enjoying cheese, Loire Valley cheeses go really nice with Sancerre, with Loire Valley white wines. Harder cheeses, Comté, nice with Bordeaux. Sometimes wines with a little bit of sugar go nice with something really salty or spicy. I did not mention Chenin, but I don't know that producer, but I'd be curious about it. What am I drinking right now? I am drinking a Muscadet from the Loire Valley, which is a very clean, crisp, dry white wine from as far west as you can get in the Loire. It's a coastal wine. It's classically paired with oysters.
I want to thank everyone for coming to Girls Night In online and supporting Lauren. If you loved her class, please consider supporting her with a tip through her Venmo account at LHSTORRIE, the code 0674. You can find this information on our website, which is gnionline.com. Thanks so much for coming, and we hope that you come to another class supporting another whole group of amazing women, and that you all have a great weekend.